Native American heritage this month, NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton brings us an incredible piece from New Mexico about the Santa Fe Indian School, an Indian boarding school with a traumatic past that's now making a huge difference in the lives of students in their tribal communities. These students are carrying on their traditional Native cultures thanks to a curriculum that celebrates their indigenous roots within the walls of a place that once tried to extinguish it.
For generations, Indigenous families have shared stories about the history of boarding schools, run by the federal government and designed to assimilate their children and separate them from their families. Recently, the federal government has been investigating the lives that have been lost and ruined by that system. But one school system in Santa Fe is already building a new era on old land and turning tragedy into triumph.
Christy Lake, guys. Hi, sweetheart.
For Christy Abeta, becoming superintendent of the Santa Fe Indian Boarding School was a dream job. She's not just an administrator, but a steward of history, overseeing a school that has overcome.
So for some people, it's too painful to come back here.
Founded in 1890 by the U.S. government, it was one of more than 400 boarding schools in the 19th and 20th centuries that used separation and violence.
That was the very thing that I believe helped to end my brother's life. Whenever the community reared up about me coming back here in 2014, was because the pain was so bad that he couldn't face it. The pain of knowing that we was thrown to the wolves whenever we was children growing up, and now we was basically thrown to the wolves again later in 2014, 15, 16, and 17, primarily just because David Jeffrey Jackson's brother, which was James Robert Jackson's youngest son, because of myself, Dennis James Jackson, come back to this particular area in 2014, and for 3 years, 3 consecutive years, we was terrorized, tormented, harassed, humiliated, demonized, and dehumanized by various people in this area. And to top it off, the law enforcement pertaining to the weekly county courts, pertaining to the courthouse, and other law enforcement agencies, as well as communicators and enforcers in this area, stood idly by and let it happen for 3 consecutive years, and it didn't stop. It didn't stop until my Heavenly Father stopped it. For people to be treated like this in the 21st century goes beyond anything that even I can begin to fathom, especially knowing the scars that has happened to the indigenous Native American people here in the United States that had to sacrifice so much to allow for the white man, the European man, to come over here and basically put his roots down. I'm glad that MSNBC is putting this message out, because basically the day after Thanksgiving is whenever prior President Obama made it official that the day of mourning was dedicated basically either on Thanksgiving or the day of after Thanksgiving, of mourning pertaining to how that the indigenous Native American people was taken advantage of, looked over, abused, used, and not treated in a humanly form. And even to this day, if you look at the suicide rate up in places like Montana and other areas up where there's known of lots of Indians, various Indian tribes, the suicide rate and the abuse, the alcohol abuse and the drug abuse is higher basically in those areas than it is basically throughout the rest of throughout the nation, and that includes Alaska and even Hawaii, if you can believe that. Alaska, sure enough. Hawaii's probably one of the least, because people basically think that they're living in paradise over there, compared to the things that people in other parts of this country live in. It all has an effect on people's morale. It all has an effect on people's momentum pertaining to their drive, and it all has an effect in basically how people don't look at life towards it being meaningful any longer, because of the horrors that has befallen up into their lives.
To stamp out the traditions and
let's back it up a little bit. I want to get all this right there.
It was one of more than 400 boarding schools in the 19th and 20th centuries that used separation and violence to stamp out the traditions and spirit of indigenous children, and took hundreds of lives, all in the name of assimilation.
You still hear stories from families who say, we'll never ever send our students to an Indian school because of the experiences of my grandfather and what they lived through.
This is all that remains of the original school building from 1890, a site where children were separated from families, beaten if they spoke their native languages, chained if they broke the rules. It was once a site of incredible pain, but now it's a reminder of how far this place has come. In 1976, the tribal governors of the 19 local Pueblo communities took control and indigenized the curriculum, and now native language and culture are celebrated here. Tribal elders teach history. They have one of the highest graduation rates in New Mexico. On Indigenous Peoples Day, the campus was transformed. Students and families ate, prayed, and danced together.
Back in the day, we were not allowed to speak our languages. We were punished if we did, punished for just dressing up in our regalia. And so being able to dance freely shows our resilience as Native people.
For senior Alexis Vigil, who had a tough childhood and was separated from her Pueblo at age 5, being part of this is healing.
I feel like that kind of sparked more of an interest for me to want to go back home and relearn and regain everything that was lost.
Now the school teaches 6 different native languages. Alvino Sandoval teaches the Dene language, also known as Navajo.
These are the change agents, and they're the ones that will make the difference. And we'll see continue to hear the language, the prayers, the songs.
Cristia Beta hopes this school becomes a model, as Indigenous Americans push lawmakers to act on 2 bills that would create a congressional commission to study records from the Indian boarding schools.
There has been a movement to talk less about race in school. So are you finding that you're doing this at a time when there's less and less support for it?
There's always been this resistance to accepting that people aren't all the same. But if you really want to reach your kids, you have to acknowledge who they are, where they come from, and what's important to them.
Many of the students that we spoke with say that their grades and their self-confidence soared once they switched from traditional schools to this one. And they hope that the school system serves as an inspiration, not just for the curriculum and approaches in Indigenous communities, but for schools across the board.
Amen.
Up next, the growing fallout from that Supreme Court leak. And no, we're not talking about the one that previewed Roe v. Wade being overturned. Welcome.
So many things about this country has been bogus. It has been hypocritical, full of hypocrisy toward trying to hide the truth pertaining to what has went on here
Alex Wagner tonight
here in America. And I think that it's made things worse by trying to cover up the sins of the past.
There's new fallout from that New York Times report that a 2014 Supreme Court ruling on reproductive care leaked to a conservative activist weeks before it was made public. The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin, says his panel is reviewing the matter, claiming that it highlights the, quote, inexcusable Supreme Court loophole in judicial ethics. And Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, along with Congressman Hank Johnson, have released a letter this week that the two lawmakers sent to Chief Justice John Roberts in private 2 months ago, before this Times report came out, saying, quote, the court needs to get its house in order and adopt a binding code of ethics. My panel is back with me to discuss all of this. Molly, I want to start with you. What's your reaction to the second Supreme Court leak?
I mean, I think it's insane that there isn't a code of ethics for the highest court in the land, right? I mean, this is the most powerful court. They have lifetime appointments. They're, even if they're not doing anything unethical, which I'm not saying they're not, even the appearance of being unethical is meaningful. You have a court that is very right-leaning. It's a 6-3 court. It's a lifetime appointment. And you have clearly, a lot of, you have these 2 leaks. You have Justice Thomas's wife, who's very involved in Republican politics, whatever that looks like. And you don't have an ethic, you don't have a code for these people. So, I mean, this seems like a no-brainer. Again, the problem is you have this Republican Party that is so dug in that even though the American people, I mean, remember, the court is very unpopular right now. It's probably the most unpopular it's been for many decades. But this Republican Party doesn't really care about that. They just care about the mix.
Right, and Molly, I'll stay with you. I mean, that's something that Senator Durbin has pushed, right, to have these type of codes and ethical norms. What type of impact do you think that would have?
I mean, I think it's a game changer. And first of all, I mean, the idea that it doesn't exist is so wild to me. But I think it would be huge. I also think that there are ways, I mean, I personally think the Supreme Court should be term limited, right? And that you could sort of, I mean, there are ways to change the makeup of the court that aren't necessarily adding more justices. And I think, look, I don't think Democrats are going to be in the position to do it now, but there may be a time when they are. And I think, this court has so much power. They've already, in the last session, they've overturned Roe v. Wade. This was their first session. I mean, it's huge. They took a right away from us that we'd had for 50 years. And they've also, gutted the EPA, and now they're going after voting rights this session, and they show no sign of slowing down.
Dean, obviously the Supreme Court, was the officials there were very quick to launch an investigation after the leak of the draft decision overturning Roe v. Wade, and yet it seems unclear if the same thing is going to happen with this 2014 leak. Why do you think that is?
It's remarkable. It's a great question. I had Congressman Hank Johnson on my radio show earlier this week to talk about this, where they sent a letter, him and Sheldon Whitehouse, the Chief Justice going, you've known about this for months and you've been silent. You haven't talked about it anyway. And you know what's even more remarkable? All the other federal judges are covered by a code of ethics, except for the Supreme Court. It's not like none of the judges have a code. They are controlled by a federal statute. The Supreme Court isn't. And to Molly's point, the Gallup poll has confidence Supreme Court down to 25%, the lowest ever in Gallup polling. And earlier this year, Chief Justice Roberts was talking about concerned about legitimacy of the court because people criticize the court. How about have some ethics rules? Also, how about don't take women's fundamental rights away? How about that? And then don't strike down state gun laws in the same week. So if Chief Justice Roberts is concerned about legitimacy of the court, either you do your own ethics rules or Congress has to act. And again, Republicans won't overcome a filibuster in the Senate to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of this discussion, Steve, is a matter of accountability. How do you hold the Supreme Court accountable? And if Democrats do win the Georgia runoff, they will have a better chance at holding the Supreme Court accountable. What is the importance of that?
Well, it seems wild to me that the other two branches of government have so many rules, so many ethics, and this, our most important, that's supposed to be the most, the court, the highest court in the entire countries look up to us. But seeing the importance of this, my life, if we do not pass a DACA, a DREAM Act, anything immigration in the lame duck session, my life will be decided likely by these courts for the next however many years. And I think it continues to be wild to me that that Americans don't realize how the court has been hijacked. The court has been taken by partisanship. It's not the court that people believed in 20, 30 years ago. The court now is completely radical. The court now is not something we can even recognize. And so being able to take it over, being able to get those 51 senators, and that's why it's so important that we not take our eyes off of Georgia, that the organizing continues. But going back to the very beginning of your entire show is that Democrats need to realize that the race for 2024 started a month ago. It started 2 months ago. It started in getting on the ground in our communities and making sure that they're actually listening to voters. Listening. I live in Nevada. Nevada, our Latino voters are consistently coming out to vote. Black women voters, Black voters, everybody's coming out to vote because we want to make sure that these things are done for our communities. And that's going to be the bottom line no matter what, that our communities' voices need to be heard in every single one of our branches of government.
Right. It's a matter of how do we go from here and how do we reinstate confidence and public trust in this incredibly important institution. Astrid, Molly, and Dean, thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. And thank you to you. Thank you for making the time to join us tonight. Come back tomorrow. Tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'll be in for Ayman Mohadin.
Institute public trust. Whenever you have a conniving, manipulating, contradictory government that flips as hard from one side as it does another, you're going to create an atmosphere of doubt. You're going to create an atmosphere of disbelief pertaining to what the baby boomers have pulled off for the past 35, 40 plus years. I mean, I've never seen a group of people that actually didn't know their asses from a hole in the ground, basically no more than what I have today in the things that we used to, whenever I was growing up, used to be concerned about towards fighting against or being opposed to the degree that now not only is it acceptable, but it's actually promoted. The guy, I don't forget his name, Pompeo or whatever his name, that's considering running for president, made a statement that teachers in America are nasty, pertaining to the ethic rules that they are now teaching in our classes, in our schools, that 25, 30 years ago would have absolutely been unheard of. It would have absolutely been unheard of. And the reason why is because 25, 30 years ago, we were still struggling towards being a righteous, godly nation. Well, whenever you're no longer striving towards being the same godly, righteous nation, and you've turned your back on God, then God turns his back on that nation. Now, you wonder how come that all the problems has suddenly escalated in the past few years? That's why. You cannot expect the blessings of the Heavenly Father if you as an individual or a community, a state, or a country is not upholding to the values that the Creator, the endowed Creator, expects out of its people. Because if you continue to bite the hand that has fed you, then the Creator is no longer liable or responsible for your better being. And we have seen that again and again and again, reading the Bible, of cultures and generations that's happened in the past, and we continue to make the same mistakes again. But for America to become radicalized in its decisions in its courts, from going from one extreme to another. Whenever I was growing up, even our principal, our teachers whipped our tails. If we done something really, really bad, I mean real bad, the professional people in this county took it upon to themselves to discipline the children. And at that point in time, they didn't have to contact the parent or the pre-parent. At the very most, they may have had to have had a witness, but even then, I don't even remember getting a witness by getting a paddling from either Mr. Harvey, that was the principal, and then Mr. Capps, that was the PE teacher. In addition to the English teacher, in addition to 2 or 3 other substitute teachers right up here in Sharon School, that at that time it was looked upon as being acceptable. Today, not only are the teachers or the principals not allowed to basically put a mark on their children, but it essentially works out the same way towards parenting. That the parent is not allowed to bring that type of a force into the life of a child. A matter of fact, if you get caught talking to your child now in a negative type form, that in and of itself can put you in front of a truant officer, to the degree that now all of a sudden you take a chance on losing your son or your daughter. The courts is a radical. They really are. They're a radical. They'll go from one extreme to another, and we have seen this again and again and again. If it wasn't over child abuse, in which I agree, child abuse should be number one on the ticket towards never allowing for a child to be abused. Never. But at the same time, if that child does deserve discipline tactics that are harsh because of their behavior, well, then that's where the parent has to put forth that type of discipline if they're going to stay in control of that child in making sure that that child is raised up according to their standards. Not the government standards, but the parent standards. Now, there's no doubt that if the child is being abused, either emotionally, verbally, or physically, yes, I do believe that government should have a right to step in. I sure do. But whenever it comes to everyday life, they've went entirely way too far. Just like the courts, Roe versus Wade, all of a sudden basically gave everybody a license that if you want to have 15 abortions a year, I guess you could have them. If you was an out-and-out whore and you didn't believe in any kind of birth control or any kind of, what they call it, a IAU or whatever it is that they put up inside of a woman, or other types of devices. If you're one of them type of people that don't believe in that, but yet no, you get out here and you want to sleep with Tom, Dick, and Harry, and you get pregnated, and you wind up having 2 or 3 abortions a year, that's supposed to be acceptable versus putting a IED in you, or taking birth control pills? That don't make no sense. That don't make no sense at all. At all. So our government passed the law years ago and made it legal without any formal stipulations towards a young girl. If she wanted to get rid of the child just because she didn't want the child, because she thought the child was going to interfere with her profession or etc., she could eliminate the child. Now, all these years later, you're going to pull the biscuit out of their mouths by saying, no, 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 you can't do that. Jumping from one extreme to another. The law of abortion, reproduction purposes, has been abused and violated since our laws has become lax in allowing for these young girls to do what they have done. And to jump from one extreme to another just proves to me that we're dealing with a court by law system. Everything's supposed to be run by the law of the land here in America, that basically they don't know their asses from a hole in the ground. They don't know what they're doing. Absolutely don't know what they are doing. And as far as the Supreme Court getting in there for life, that should be based upon a grade quality scale, somehow or another, that they had to perform physically, mentally, and the laws of the land towards staying up to power pertaining to various laws that has changed, or people's ethnics or the culture in general has changed. Because if you don't watch those people that get up there and stay up there for a lifetime, they lose touch with reality. They really don't know what the general public needs, or what's going on with the general public, or what's now considered acceptable to where 40, 50 years ago it wasn't. They're out of touch with reality. So for them to be able to maintain that status level, I think that they should be tested. I think that they should be graded. And if they fail the grade because of whatever, then that particular term that they're in, it's over with. It's over with, because then they have proven themselves to be unfit to be able to hold that position. That's just like the medical industry. I'm just going to use the Nurses Association for an example. You have to go and take a test every year to prove that you're mentally capable and physically capable of knowing various things about various issues. It's not just about a tuition fee, a yearly tuition fee, kind of like a membership fee. It's actually a point of reference to determine whether or not he or she is qualified to still maintain that status. If I'm not mistaken, a doctor has to go through the same thing. Judges, lawyers, governors, mayors should have the same census happening to them periodically every 2 years, even though they may be on a 4-year term. And if they fail it on the first 2 years of not being close to even being acceptable as being whatever that they're in the position of, they'll have one final chance within that 4-year term. And if they fail it that time, the second time, they're out. They're out. You're no longer qualified to hold this position. To put people in office for a lifetime and not have no rules or regulations or stipulations towards what that they have to do to be able to maintain that position, I think is absolutely, it goes beyond gross negligence to the point that it's just carelessness in every perspective you can think of. I mean, even a licensed electrician has to go get tested every year to make sure that they're up to power. A plumber ordinarily does, depending upon what state. Various occupations, truck drivers, etc. I mean, that there are qualifications and test results that are put in place for a particular purpose. And it's not just to gather up money. Even the auto body industry, you had to be certified, and you had to maintain that status towards going to school, because guess what? Automobiles evolve. People come up with new inventions. Things change from working on an automobile that was made out of this material. Now you're working on an automobile that's got this material in it. Whenever I first got involved in the auto body industry in the early 80s, airbags, third brake lights, and ABS braking systems did not even occur. It was not predominant. Matter of fact, they were still fighting at that time towards legalizing and making people put their seatbelts on. For some reason, this nation has been extremely hard to be able to grow, advance, evolve, and mature. I don't know what has happened to it, but it's pretty obvious that they're very lax in their professionalism. They're very lax in safety courses. They're very lax in their laws. They're very lax in other things. And I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't want to go to a nurse or a doctor that hasn't taken an exam or a test in the past 2 or 3 years, because there may have been some other kind of new breakthrough on a medication that could treat the problem that you're going through twice as easy, but because they wasn't knowledgeable of that particular product, they're in the dark. I don't want to go to somebody that's stupid and dumb when it comes to my problems going on with my body. Just like I don't want to take my automobile to somebody that don't know shit from Shanover about how to fix it. I don't want to call up an electrician if he's going to hook up the wires and cause my house to catch a fire. Just like I don't want to stand in front of a judge or a politician that don't know what the hell's going on pertaining to today's society. These people should be graded towards their ability, because even the Bible taught 2,000 years ago to study to show thyself approved for show thyself approved towards being able to rightly divide the scriptures and understanding the differences between the physical form versus the spiritual form. And in some cases, it's actually talking about the two of the same thing in understanding the scriptures. That's the reason why so many people has to study the Bible, is because it's not just Jack went up the hill and Spot done this. It's very complex, and that's why you got to study. The medical industry is very complex. Laws are very complex. Some laws change. Some laws are different in one state versus another state. Just like an electrician or a plumber, they got certain guidelines to go by depending upon what state, because you're not going to have the same guidelines in a hurricane ravaged state like Florida, or some of the lower coast areas like Louisiana or Mississippi or whatever. You're not going to have the same laws up in, let's say, the Rocky Mountains as you do down there. You can't even dig a basement anywhere in the southern areas, because usually once you dig a basement, it gets filled full of water. Matter of fact, some areas are so bad that you can't even bury the dead below the ground, like over in New Orleans. So there's different laws for different purposes for different states that requires whatever that state is going through. It should be the same thing with our justices. It should be the same thing with our judges. It should be the same thing with the attorneys bar. It should be the same thing with our politicians. Politicians should not be allowed to go year after year after year and not have some sort of a physical as well as a physical as well as a identification of their achievements, of what that they can do and what that they know. There should be some sort of guidelines. It shouldn't be a wild, wild west show. Maybe that's the reason why that this country swings as far to the left as it does to the right on different issues. I've never seen nothing like it. I don't know why we can't halfway meet in the middle towards compromising that it's not all of this and it's not all of that. We're going to meet in the middle and agree to disagree, but at the same time realize that this is the best that we're going to be able to do with this particular issue. How come we can't do that? I don't know. Other than the fact that the Bible speaks very, very fluently that Satan is the author of confusion. Satan is the one that brings all this division and complexity into people's lives to the point that they don't know if they're coming or going. They don't know their rear ends from a hole in the ground. It's the devil that causes that type of environment. And if people can't understand that or recognize that, then obviously they're part of the problem versus part of the solution to the problem. It's really sad the way that this nation has hopscotched from one issue to another issue by going just as far to one side of the issue as they have the other issues of going to the extremes. And you wonder how come the weather goes to the extremes? You wonder how come the forces of nature goes through extremes? One year it's liable to be super, super hot and super, super dry, and the next year we're liable to have monsoons. We're liable to have deluges that drown a bunch of communities and kill a bunch of people. You wonder how come the weather, the forces of nature are extreme? Get to looking at the people's lives. Get to looking at how the people are living and what the people are doing. The Bible talks about the sorrows because of the sins. Great sorrows will fall upon the society because of the way that society is living their lives. These things that are occurring, it's coming out of the sky and doing what they're doing, it's not just a hoax. It's not a coincidence. We have brought this upon to ourselves. And if we hadn't brought this upon to ourselves, physically speaking, we have brought this upon to ourselves emotionally or psychologically or even spiritually speaking. If we don't get a handle on what the heck's going on, you will see suffering upon this planet such as mankind has never ever witnessed before. And it continues to keep warning people and giving advisories of that again and again and again. And this obviously is where the preachers, the teachers, the evangelists, and the ministers have failed the people because they did not dig deep enough into the Bible in translating and understanding the warnings and the signals that we were supposed to be looking at that has drawn us so far into this calamity that we're now all facing. I've never seen a group of people that was so blinded. If the blind lead the blind, they also leadeth off into the ditch. Who knows what this government's going to do about DACA? Who knows? I've heard that they're going to give everybody a free ticket towards giving them just as much right to be able to go down here at the healthcare department or file for food stamps, or whenever they get ready to retire, to draw their retirement, even though a lot of them hasn't even so much as paid a penny into the system. So you got to ask yourself a question. Is that fair for the people that's lived here all their lives? Is that fair for somebody that's worked 35, 40, maybe 50 years in the labor force, that's paid taxes and been devoted towards paying taxes and being part of the system? Now all of a sudden somebody comes over here to this country and now we're going to pay if she's pregnant for the delivery, and plus we're going to take care of the child? I mean, where does this thing stop whenever it comes to fairness, whenever it comes to DACA? I've never seen nothing like it. And plus you got to look at the fact that the more people that come over here illegally, I'm all for people coming over here illegally. I don't care what country that they come from. That's what made America great to begin with, was all the foreigners that come over here that wanted to build into the same future or into the same vision or ideal or dream that began hundreds of years ago. I'm all for bringing people over here legally, but whenever you bring 5,000 to 8,000 people over here a day illegally, and I think so far it's been something like 2 million people this year alone that's come over the border illegally, you are constantly straining our resources of our water, our food, our highway system, the electrical grid, etc., etc. You're constantly bringing people over here illegally that is putting a strain on everything and everybody else, which is not fair for everybody else. It's one thing if the system was being strained because of the people that was coming over here legally. I think we could handle that all day long. But to handle an invasion of all these illegal immigrants that's come over here to America, not only are they going to make it that much more worse on the people that's already been here, but it's unfair, it's unethical, and to be quite honest with you, I just can't see where a government can sway so far to the left as it does the right and still say that it's for the original American people that are the genuine, indigenous people that has been here all their lives, and their families and their families. And I mean, I know for a fact that I can go back into the 1700s and possibly even further than that towards my genealogy on the Jackson side. I never have really studied all that in depthly on the Davis side. I do know that I go pretty far back on the James's side, because that was on my mother's side, the Jordans. I've done some study on the Jameses, going all the way back to Jesse and Frank James. No, I'm not proud of some of the stuff that they done, but at the same time, I realize why they done what they done, because they was provoked into doing it. And if you don't accept that or want to look at that in that same entitlement, that's up to you. I'm just telling you, no, it don't excuse what they done towards doing the things that they done that was wrong. It don't excuse it. But you got to accept the fact that whenever that they was growing up and what occurred and what was predominant in that area towards all the violence, all the guerrilla violence, and everything going on in this country, you got to put 2 plus 2 together to be able to equal 4. And if you don't do it, it's nobody's fault but your own. I just had a Bible conference study today with some Mormons over a chapter that I didn't understand. And we stayed on the telephone for probably about an hour and a half explaining various words that meant various things, because the Book of Mormon has terminology issues of interpretations that I am not familiar with, and because I'm not familiar with those interpretations, I actually wanted to verify what this word meant, what that word meant. But does this word mean this? Does that word mean that? Because the Book of Mormon is a pretty in-depth educational book. If you're going to pick it up and read it, you almost have to have a college degree to understand the Book of Mormon. You really do. It's that highly advanced. It's not a book that you just give to an everyday Christian and say, here you go, read it, figure it out for your own. Good luck to you, and I'll see you up in heaven one day. You got to actually dig in to that book to understand what certain words meant because of the terminology that they was describing those issues in. Good luck to all of us as we end this particular program by saying, God bless America, God bless our troops, God bless America's endeavors. Good luck to each and every one of us on this weekend after Thanksgiving, the year 2022. There are a lot of issues that need to be examined and straightened out with either federal government, state government, or even, yes, local government. There has to be common sense issues if we're going to be a self-sustainable nation that will pull towards the betterment of the good versus the betterment of the evil. Because if we continue on this path that we're on and getting chastened by these forces of nature, we're not going to survive this very much longer. Because these hits that continue to keep hitting America, either in the form of this form or that form, is once more draining our resources. And everything is based on supply and demand. And whenever you have more of a demand than you do a supply, guess what's going to happen to the prices? Bingo. Now you're starting to figure out why it's essential. Thanks again. God bless. Heaven help us all, and shalom.